Have you ever stood in the presence of a truly formidable intellect and felt not just admiration, but a primal, unsettling chill? Have you ever listened to someone articulate a truth so sharp, so incisive, that it felt less like an observation and more like a vivisection of your most cherished beliefs? Perhaps you are one of those minds yourself, cursed with a clarity that forces you to see the logical fallacies in beloved traditions, the structural rot beneath glittering institutions, and the tragic, predictable trajectory of a society high on its own comforting illusions. Perhaps you are utterly exhausted from the lonely, draining effort of navigating a world that punishes you for the very gift you possess. A world that fears your questions, resents your insights, and labels your clarity as arrogance, your foresight as pessimism, and your refusal to conform as a declaration of war. In truth, all you yearn for is to find a place where the full force of your mind can be unleashed without being perceived as a threat. You might have learned to dim your own light, to meticulously simplify your language, and to feign ignorance on certain topics, earnestly believing that these elaborate acts of self-censorship are the price of social harmony. Yet despite every painstaking effort, the gnawing alienation persists. The familiar ache of seeing a world that others cannot or will not see stubbornly resurfaces, and the elusive dream of true intellectual communion remains frustratingly just beyond your grasp. You convince yourself that if you were just a little warmer, a little less intense, or a little more patient, the world would finally embrace you. But let me tell you something that society, in the deepest and most terrified recesses of its soul, already knows. Your mind is a threat. As long as you possess the capacity to see beyond the prescribed narrative, to deconstruct the shared myths, and to ask the questions that have no easy answers, you will, with a cruel and unyielding irony, be an existential danger to the very social fabric you inhabit. You are feared not for any malice you hold, but for the fundamental, terrifying nature of genius itself, its power to dissolve, to dismantle, and to destroy. This is not, let me be clear, a paranoid fantasy. Rather, it is a stark, unvarnished diagnosis of the eternal and tragic conflict between the creator and the collective, between the visionary and the tribe. Human society is not built on a foundation of unvarnished truth. It is built on a scaffolding of useful fictions. It is a grand, intricate, and astonishingly fragile consensus, a shared dream, woven from national myths, religious dogmas, economic theories, and social conventions that allow millions of strangers to cooperate. These stories about our purpose, our values, our superiority, our destiny, are the very things that give our collective lives meaning and coherence. They are the psychological immune system that protects the herd from the terrifying, chaotic abyss of meaninglessness. The brutal truth is that civilization runs on a low-grade, consensual delusion, and the first and most unforgivable sin of the genius is to be awake in the dream. The genius possesses what can only be described as a terrible clarity. Where others see a sacred tradition, the genius sees an arbitrary set of rules designed to solve a problem that no longer exists. Where others see a patriotic duty, the genius sees a sophisticated manipulation of tribal instinct. Where others see a divine revelation, the genius sees an elegant metaphor for a psychological truth. This is not an act of cynicism, it is an act of perception. The genius cannot help but see the source code of the matrix, the puppet strings attached to the cultural marionettes, the cracks in the foundation of the cathedral. And when they speak what they see, they are not merely offering an opinion, they are committing an act of sacrilege. They are holding up a mirror to the herd, and the herd, seeing its own comfortable illusions reflected back as a grotesque and hollow mask, does not thank the mirror-bearer. It smashes the mirror. Consider the historical figures who have paid the ultimate price for their clarity. Socrates executed for corrupting the youth by teaching them to question the official gods of Athens. Galileo, imprisoned for daring to suggest that the earth was not the center of God's universe. Spinoza, excommunicated and reviled for deconstructing the very idea of a personal, interventionist God. These were not evil men. They were men cursed with a vision that their societies were not prepared to integrate. Their genius was a solvent that threatened to dissolve the very glue holding their worlds together. This dynamic persists today, albeit in less bloody forms. The intellectual who questions the core tenets of a political ideology is not debated, but branded a heretic. The scientist whose data contradicts a profitable corporate narrative is not engaged, but silenced and smeared. The artist who exposes the raw hypocrisy of our social mores is not celebrated, but dismissed as a dangerous provocateur. The genius is the ultimate outsider, not because they choose to be, but because their very perception of reality places them outside the warm, narcotic embrace of the collective dream. They are the sober guest at a drunken party, and their clarity is an intolerable judgment on everyone else's intoxication. The first and most profound threat of genius, therefore, is the threat of disillusionment. It is the terrifying possibility that the world is not as it seems, and that the truths we have built our lives upon are nothing more than a beautiful lie. The second, and perhaps more instinctual threat of genius is its profound and unapologetic individualism. Society, by its very nature, is a collective enterprise. It demands conformity, cohesion, and a certain degree of submission of the individual will to the group. The herd finds safety in numbers, comfort in consensus, and identity in shared belief. Its morality is a morality of utility, designed to ensure the smooth functioning and preservation of the group. Good is what is good for the tribe. Bad is what threatens the tribe. Into this intricate web of mutual dependence and enforced similarity is born the genius, a creature whose primary allegiance is not to the tribe, but to an inner, driving force that the tribe cannot comprehend. The true genius is not motivated by the desire for social approval, wealth, or status, though they may acquire these things as byproducts. They are motivated by an obsessive, insatiable, and often self-destructive compulsion. The need to solve the puzzle, to complete the symphony, to find the answer, to create the thing that is clawing its way out from the depths of their soul. This inner law is absolute and uncompromising. It will demand the sacrifice of comfort, of relationships, of social standing, and sometimes even of sanity itself. This self-sufficiency is a profound insult to the collective. The herd's power is predicated on the individual's need for the herd. But the genius, in their moments of creation, needs nothing and no one. They are a closed circuit, a self-contained universe of thought and inspiration. This is why society is so often suspicious of its most brilliant minds. It watches their solitary work, their strange hours, their disregard for social niceties, and it senses, on a deep animalistic level, a rejection. The genius's independence is not perceived as a sign of strength, but as a silent declaration that the herd is not enough. This fear manifests in the common tropes we use to describe genius. They are mad scientists, tortured artists, eccentric professors, figures who are fundamentally other, who do not play by the same rules. We admire their creations, but we fear the creator. We consume the fruit of their solitude, but we punish them for the very solitude that was necessary to produce it. This rejection is a two-way street. The genius, in turn, often feels a profound contempt for the intellectual laziness and moral cowardice of the herd. They are exhausted by the endless small talk, the illogical superstitions, and the brutish, emotional reasoning that governs so much of social life. This creates an unbridgeable chasm. The herd fears the genius's mind, and the genius despairs of the herd's mindlessness. This is not a simple misunderstanding. It is a fundamental incompatibility of operating systems. The collective is designed for stability and survival through imitation. The genius is designed for disruption and evolution through creation. When these two forces meet, the result is rarely a harmonious collaboration. More often, it is a collision, with the genius branded as an arrogant, antisocial, and dangerous anomaly that must either be tamed into mediocrity or cast out from the tribe. The first two threats, however, pale in comparison to the third and most terrifying dark side of genius, its ability to unleash forces that society cannot control. The genius is not merely a passive observer who shatters illusions. They are an active agent who fundamentally alters the nature of reality. They are the true Prometheans, the firebringers who gift humanity with new powers that we are often too childish and brutish to wield wisely. This is the dark bargain of progress. Every new technology, every new philosophy, every new form of art is a double-edged sword, and the genius is the one who forges the blade and places it in humanity's hand. The genius gives humanity a razor blade, and humanity, like a toddler, is just as likely to shave the cat as to slit its own throat. Consider the physicist who, driven by a pure and noble curiosity to understand the fundamental nature of matter, unlocks the secrets of the atom. In that sublime moment of discovery, their mind is communing with the deepest truths of the universe. They are an artist painting with the colors of creation. But the equation they write on the blackboard does not remain on the blackboard. It is seized by the tribe, by the politicians, the generals, the states, and it is weaponized. The sublime beauty of EMC-2 becomes the grotesque horror of Hiroshima. The genius, in their pure pursuit of knowledge, gives birth to a monster. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, famously quoted the Bhagavad Gita upon witnessing the first nuclear test. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This was the cry of a genius who had finally and tragically understood the terrifying consequences of his own creation. This is not an isolated phenomenon. The same psychological insights that can be used to heal trauma can also be used to create sophisticated propaganda that enslaves the minds of millions. The same computer science that connects the world can be used to build autonomous weapons that kill with chilling efficiency. The same biological breakthroughs that can cure genetic diseases can be used to create designer plagues. The genius is often morally neutral in the act of creation. Their focus is on the "can it be done?" The tribe, however, is rarely neutral in the act of application. Its focus is on the "how can we use this to dominate our rivals?" The dark side of genius is that its intellectual creations are inevitably orphaned. They are born into a world that lacks the moral and intellectual maturity to raise them. The genius opens Pandora's box out of a relentless need to know what's inside, and then society is left to grapple with the horrors that fly out. This is why the most dangerous ideas are often not the evil ones, but the brilliant ones. An evil idea can be recognized and fought, but a brilliant idea, a new technology, a new social theory, a new way of organizing the world, has a seductive power. It promises utopia, efficiency, and progress. See, it is only after it has been integrated, after it has rewired the very fabric of our world, that we begin to see the cost. And by then, it is often too late. The genie cannot be put back in the bottle. The final and most profound threat of genius is its irreversibility. It is a one-way door to a future that we may not be equipped to survive. Given these profound threats, it is no surprise that the journey of the genius is almost always a path of profound suffering. The dark side is not just the threat they pose to the world, but the unbearable burden the world imposes upon them. The internal reality of the genius is often one of deep and painful isolation. To see what no one else sees is a lonely vigil. To understand the world with a clarity that others lack is to be a perpetual foreigner in your own land. This is the price of their gift. The exhaustion of having to constantly translate complex, nuanced thoughts into simplistic soundbites that the herd can digest. The frustration of watching society make the same predictable, idiotic mistakes over and over again, like a tragic comedy stuck on a loop. The horror of foreseeing a catastrophe, be it ecological, political, or social, and screaming a warning into a gale of indifference and ridicule. This is the internal exile of the brilliant mind. Furthermore, the very mental machinery that allows for genius-level creativity and insight is often perilously close to the machinery of madness. The same associative thinking that can connect two disparate ideas to form a groundbreaking theory can also connect them to form a paranoid delusion. The same intense focus that allows for years of work on a single problem can also manifest as a debilitating obsessive-compulsive disorder. The sensitivity that allows an artist to perceive the subtle emotional currents of the world also makes them painfully vulnerable to its ugliness and cruelty. Society sees the beautiful finished product, the theorem, the painting, the novel, but it rarely sees the psychological blood and chaos that went into its creation. The genius is often a person at war with their own mind, battling their own demons in a lonely arena, all while trying to create something that will ironically be feared and misunderstood by the very people they are creating it for. This leads to the ultimate paradox. The genius, who possesses the greatest capacity to understand and shape the world, is often the least equipped to live happily within it. Their mind, a finely tuned instrument for perceiving truth, is a blunt and clumsy tool for navigating the messy, illogical, and often brutal realities of human social life. And so the call to action for the genius is not to seek the herd's approval, for that is a fool's errand that will only end in mediocrity and despair. The true journey is to learn to bear the terrible weight of their own vision. It is to find solace not in external validation, but in the sacred, solitary act of creation itself. It is to build a fortress of the mind so rich, so compelling, and so complete that the incomprehension and hostility of the outside world become little more than a distant, irrelevant noise. It is to accept that their alienation is not a curse to be cured, but the necessary price of admission to the worlds they alone can build. So how does this eternal, dangerous dance between the genius and society end? It doesn't. This is the final, brutal truth. The relationship is not a problem to be solved, but a fundamental tension to be managed. Society needs its geniuses. They are the engines of progress, the solvers of intractable problems, and the creators of the beauty that makes life worth living. Without them, civilization would stagnate and eventually collapse under the weight of its own unexamined dogmas. But society will always, on some level, fear and resent them. It will always be tempted to blunt the sharp edges of their minds, to sand down their abrasive truths, and to pull them back into the comforting embrace of the collective. The struggle for society, then, is to become mature enough to tolerate the discomfort that genius brings. It is to cultivate a culture that values radical questioning over blind obedience, that rewards intellectual courage over social conformity, and that understands that the minds who see the world differently are its most precious and endangered resource. It must learn to handle the fire of genius without extinguishing the flame or burning itself to the ground. And the struggle for the genius is to cultivate a tragic sense of responsibility. It is to understand that their creations have consequences, that their insights can be weaponized, and that their clarity can feel like an act of violence to those who are not ready for it. It is to find a way to communicate their vision not with contempt, but with a difficult, hard-won compassion for the very herd that fears them. They must learn to be the reluctant shepherds of a species that is perpetually terrified of being led out of its comfortable, familiar pastures. The dark side of genius is not an aberration or a flaw. It is an inherent and inseparable part of the light. The same mind that can compose a transcendent symphony can also design a weapon of mass destruction. The same clarity that can liberate can also destroy. The genius is not a simple hero or a straightforward villain. They are a necessary, terrifying, and transformative force of nature. They are the living embodiment of humanity's greatest potential and its most profound danger, forever locked in a tragic and beautiful struggle with the world they were born to change.